Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Indies Introduced series where we spotlight debut authors handpicked by booksellers from around the country. In each episode, a bookseller from the Indies Introduced panel will interview the author of a debut title featured in our program.
Hi, my name is Jocele Skinner, and I am a bookstore owner. I own Shared Stories in Caldwell, Idaho, and I'm here today talking to Roberta Kwok about her new book, Lost in Curiosity. Roberta Kwok is a science writer whose work has appeared in the New York Times, NewYorker.com, Nature, New Scientist, Audubon, and other publications. She has joined a fellowship from the Knight Science Journalism program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and awards from the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the American Geophysical Union. Before becoming a journalist, Kwok worked in a genetics lab at Stanford University. She lives in the Seattle area and is originally from Canada. Her new book, Lost in Curiosity, is available now from Source Books. Welcome, Roberta.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you. Our Indies Introduced panel loved your book, and I am a scientist by trade, and so I especially just love digging into the various topics that you wrote about.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yes, thank you. Can you just tell me a little bit more about your background and a little bit more of your science training? It looks like you've done a lot of science in addition to writing.
Yeah, so science is kind of in my DNA. My dad is an astronomer. My mom worked in a genetics testing lab at a hospital. So when I went to college, I started out studying biology and I worked in like a cancer lab and an immunology lab, but I really was not very good at it. Like my experiments would often go wrong and I wouldn't know why. And I feel like people who are like true scientists, they know how to troubleshoot their way out of that. Like they can MacGyver some kind of solution, but I really didn't have that scientific instinct. So I sort of switched to software engineering. I was like coding at a bioinformatics startup in Silicon Valley for a while, but on the side, I was taking night classes in fiction writing because I'd always loved reading and writing. So I eventually took another left turn and went to an MFA program in creative writing. And while I was there, started getting interested in nonfiction, like taking a class in essay writing and science journalism. And I think when I took that science journalism class, that was the turning point where I realized, oh, like I can write about science even if I'm not doing it, because there's so many amazing stories to tell in science. And so I've been a freelance science journalist now for probably almost 2 decades.
Okay, that's amazing. That's wonderful. So how did you come up with the idea to write Lost in Curiosity? Where did that inspiration come from?
So that, I mean, the seed for that was planted, it was almost exactly 20 years ago. So it would have been 2006. So that's when I was in that MFA program in creative writing. I was taking the essay writing class and I decided it would be fun to write a science essay about a friend of mine, Ben. So Ben was a PhD student, same university, we were in Bloomington, Indiana, and he was studying evolutionary biology and specifically sunflowers and how they enter what he calls puberty, like how do they know when it's time to sort of grow up? How does that change depending on how much light they're getting? So I thought, okay, I'll follow Ben on a 20-hour experiment in the lab where he's collecting these leaf samples every few hours, and I'll write about it. And so I, tag along and, we start at 7 a.m. in the morning. We end at about 3 a.m. the following morning. And a bunch of things go wrong during this experiment. And so at 3 a.m., Ben, like I'm exhausted at this point, and Ben decides that all of the samples that we had just collected probably were useless, and he was just going to redo the entire experiment. So that made an impression on me, like his persistence, his devotion to his research question. And then if we fast forward like 10 years now, I'm a science journalist, I'm writing news stories, and the point of the news story is to like report the result, right? Like what did they find? What was the discovery? But I knew, like, from that experience with Ben and my own experiences, that there was so much more happening behind the scenes that wasn't being said in these news stories, that there's all these years of uncertainty and failure and doubt, and there's this like valley of the unknown that scientists have to cross to get to the other side. So I wanted to write a book that would go behind the scenes and follow those twists and turns behind the scientific discovery, sort of like the opposite of a eureka moment, is how I came to think of it.
Well, and there were times that I think I was on the edge of my seat, literally while I was reading, like, oh my gosh, are they gonna solve this? Are they gonna do this? So you did a great job kind of showing that process. So um how did you define projects to write about and to decide sort of, in a given field, what was the topic that you were going to write about?
Yeah, so the book is broken into 9 chapters, and each one follows a research team or a scientist from a different field of science. So everything from like biology to chemistry to physics to, molecular biology. So for some of those chapters, I had written news stories about the scientists before, like the astronomy one. I'd written a blog post about astronomers chasing transits. That's um, basically where a planet crosses a star, and when it does that, it causes this tiny little dip in light, and you can catch that, and that tells you the planet is there. And there was so much emotion in these stories about these astronomers chasing transits. Like one of them talked about how it was like getting drunk, like you don't have your best judgment because you want to see the transit so badly. And one astronomer who ended up in the book, David Kipping, he like canceled Valentine's Day plans with his girlfriend to catch a transit because you can't, they happen at certain times. You can't like, you have to be there when the transit is happening. So I felt like there was a human element there that could be explored more. And I knew that David Kipping was searching for exomoon transits next, which was when a moon is crossing the star. And it's an even tinier signal and even harder to detect. So that was one example of a case where I'd had some background and I just went back to him to find out more about the story. And then in other cases, I was just going into it totally new. So I was scanning, tons of news stories, tons of scientific papers, making lots of phone calls, talking to lots of people, trying to figure out like who am I going to follow for, for example, for the physics chapter or the chemistry chapter. Um, and it really was not a scientific process at all. Like I did not have objective criteria like, oh, well, I think this is the most important study happening in this field right now, right? It was very just instinctual. Like, do I feel an emotional connection with this scientist? Like, do they tell me stories that are fascinating that I want to hear more about? Do I feel a connection to them as a person? And so one example of that maybe is like the paleontology chapter where the scientist Meg Whitney was studying this creature called Lystrosaurus. And it's this funny little, animal that lived about 250 million years ago. Kind of looks like a cross between a warthog and a little hippo. And, is that like the most important animal we should be studying? Is it the most important question in paleontology right now? Probably not. But, when Meg told me about Lystrosaurus, it just sounded so endearing. I wanted to know more about it. So that's how I picked the remaining chapters.
Very cool. Well, and the exomoon chapter was exactly the one where I was literally just on the edge of my seat thinking, are they going to find these things?
And it's still ongoing. Yeah, it's the story's been going on for many, many years now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you did a great job. So, what did the process of writing look like? Did you mostly just spend time interviewing researchers, or did you spend a lot of time digging into the science background on your own to try and understand what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of reading research papers, tons of interviews, and including those with scientists outside the team just to get my mind around these scientific concepts, which could be pretty hairy. But the most important part was just following the main scientist in the chapter for months or even years and really committing to following that journey. So that just meant many, many, many phone calls with them where they would share what was happening, what the latest problems were, like what they were doing to overcome those obstacles. And sometimes I would get to sit in on like Zoom meetings with their team. And that was actually fascinating because then I got to hear the dialogue between scientists as they were talking about new challenges that had come up or arguing about ideas. And then for about half the chapters, I would say, I was lucky enough to get to travel in person to the field site or to the lab and see the science in action. So, for example, the geology chapter, I follow glaciologists who are studying this incredibly remote site on the Greenland ice sheet called Helheim Glacier. It's only reachable by helicopter. And they are trying to track the flow of water through the ice sheet, through these massive crevasses to better understand how much sea level is going to rise in the coming years. And so for that, I was able to fly to Sealik, which is this town off the southeast coast of Greenland, take, a short trip to their field site on Helheim by helicopter and actually see their camp. And then into Sealig, hang out with the scientists who are still in town, following their teammates' progress on the ice, and to see that whole drama unfolding before my eyes. So that was an incredible experience. And then, for other field reporting trips, sometimes I would try to get involved in doing the science if I could, because that also tends to yield a lot of sensory detail. Like there's a chapter about scientists and I guess engineers who are devising these things called emerald tutus. And they're basically, it sounds silly, but they're like these big canvas floating mats that have, plant matter growing off the top and like stuff hanging down the bottom. And they were using tulle, which is why they call it a tutu in the lab. And so they were testing them in this big wave lab in Oregon where they have like a wave maker machine that can generate these huge waves. And so I got to wade into the tank and like you get to like smell the weird, funky smell of the mats and you could feel like the slimy tool brushing against your legs and stuff like that. So that was great just for gathering details to create narrative scenes for the book.
Yeah. My daughter goes to Oregon State, so it was fun to read that you were in Corvallis for that. So that was fun. And then my son goes to Northern Arizona in Flagstaff, so I also really enjoyed
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah.
reading your the essay about the uranium down in Arizona and New Mexico. So it was you just picked very interesting things to write about. So um, which I guess brings me to my next question. Is there one that you found kind of especially compelling that you really took to heart and were especially interested in?
Well, I love all the chapters, but I think one of my favorites is the evolutionary biology one about the frogs. And so in that chapter, I follow Joanna, and she is a biologist who is studying these tiny frogs in the rainforests of Borneo. They're called smooth guardian frogs, and they're an obscure species that scientists just know very little about. And so she wanted to go there to understand their unique mating and parenting behavior better. And so I think part of the reason I love the chapter is because the frogs themselves are so fascinating. So, what's interesting about them is that the male guardian frogs spend a lot of time and energy caring for their young. And so they will look after their eggs, they protect them from predators. When the eggs are ready to hatch, the tadpoles will kind of wriggle onto the father's back, and the father carries his little tadpoles to a pool of water where they can grow up. So that was all really interesting. And the other reason I love the chapter is because Joanna is just so passionate about her research and an amazing character to follow and to root for. She grew up in a super protective family. Like she really wasn't even allowed to do things like play on the monkey bars or something. But she had this really fierce curiosity about the world around her, the wildlife around her. She loves observing animals. And she, kind of zeroed in on this one species and really got obsessed with it. And, she could have picked an easier one to study. Like this species is so difficult to study, and, she has to go halfway around the world just to find it. But she told me, I wanted to study the one that no one else wanted to study. And so, despite all the obstacles she has to overcome, she never gives up on that dream. And I think that makes her a character that we really, cheer for and want to, follow her throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's next for you now that you've written this amazing book? What's your next project going to be?
Well, so one thing that I really loved about the book process was getting to collaborate with an illustrator. Emma Regnier is a wildlife biologist and also an artist who creates these beautiful field notebook sketches. And so I'd asked Emma to create a drawing for each chapter in the style of a field notebook sketch. And it was just amazing to see, those ideas brought to life in this illustration that really captured that intellectual space of dreaming and thinking and being curious. And so I think I would love to do more collaborations. Like I could imagine working with an artist on an illustrated chapbook or an illustrated essay. I think that would be really fun. Because science is so visual too, right? Like I can try to write like beautiful sentences or paragraphs, but when you see the images, it's another way to connect emotionally with the science at a different level. And I think writing a book is such a huge endeavor. I think it would be fun just to do some smaller creative projects, kind of play and experiment, and I guess follow my own curiosity in that sense.
Have you ever thought about writing a book for kids?
Someone told me, oh, you should do a kid's version of Lost in
Mm.
Curiosity. Yeah, which I think would be really fun because I don't know if kids really read stories of science and action the way that they're shown in this book. There would definitely have to be some editing because there's some curse words in the book. But yeah, I think kids would get a kick out of this book too. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So I just love this book, and I just thank you for writing a book that shows how important science is, and but making it accessible to sort of the general public. So we just really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to sell it to customers at our store.
Thank you so much. It's been fun talking.
Yeah, thank you, Roberta.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!